Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge and I'm your host. I am the proud author of 11 books. I am a CEO of 12 years. I am the founder of a startup set on data privacy to protect social networking users that looked at collaborating LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram all under one roof. I am the scientist behind such theories of the optimal performance theory to the rule of transference and have coined terms along the likes of a barrier breaker to the golden rule set on top 10 tennis rankings, something that my research was able to uncover specifically on how to develop the best players in the world, which was a world first, or is and remains a world first, and something that I have been incredibly fortunate to be able to pen in 11 books growing strong. Today's episode is our third one, and for those who have been following along, thank you so much and for bearing with me as I guess we tidy a few things up, and as promised we will get there. Today's focal point is on my first book, which is titled The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, a comprehensive discussion on developing elite coaches and players. And as has become custom, the theme as such of this podcast is to open up to specific pages or chapters of these books and to really break them down and to have a discussion and get really into the nitty-gritty from what it's all about, and to really give, I guess, a bird's eye view to help you whether you're a coach, player or parent, or someone who just really enjoys sport in general, specifically tennis, is to give those additional insights to help you edge closer towards that end goal. Whether that's a top 10 tennis ranking, I'm sure we've got players out there who are inside the top 20, verging towards the top 10, or players who are just starting out at that developmental stage and they really want to know what's ahead of them. And that's where we come in, is to help you edge closer, but specifically we're all about the data and how to get that extra bit closer towards the top 10. All right, today's premise, we're on page 39 if you'd like to follow along, and it's 1.3. It's called Talent Identification. Does it serve its purpose? All right, we're going to get straight into it, and talent identification is a huge topic world round. Irrespective of what sport you play, it is something that is a term coined essentially to pick on athletes from a very early age to see if they really do have that talent to go all the way. And we're talking from a tennis perspective, maybe they'll be a Grand Slam champion. Different sports, the gold medalist at the Olympics, the best in their field in some sports. And I'm probably going to upset a few people here, which, let's be honest, if you've been following the other episodes, it's something I really enjoy doing in the best possible way, because there are so many fallacies out there or myths that really need to be dispelled. And the best part, I think, about Beyond Top 10 Tennis is that we're really coming to you from a scientific standpoint, which means we've got the data, and it's not just about an opinion. Everyone has an opinion out there, everyone you talk to, and I think the more you've been in the game, the more maybe opinions you have, but it's really not about that. So we really want to dig a little bit deeper into today's segment and give you those additional insights that will help you edge a little bit closer to that end goal. All right, here we go. Irrespective of what sport you play, what sport you coach, or where in the world you are based, you are sure to have heard of talent identification systems and or programs. Most coaches have their own view on talent identification, if it is appropriate and if it does in fact serve its purpose. I think a big point there is about if it serves its purpose, and something a lot of us could be guilty of getting caught up in is the whole system, I think, in itself, and that if you don't make the cut, if you are not identified as a future champion, then what's the point? And this is really about dispelling that, because talent identification and the systems and programs in itself are fundamentally flawed. Talent identification systems are or were designed to identify up-and-coming players, athletes who are observed or witnessed to have potential to make it to the big time, elite athlete status, are then the representatives of their nation's governing body, as they were of the belief that these athletes would pay off in the long run, essentially bringing more business, more revenue to the sport, which is a really big a concept to, I guess, get our heads around, especially for players and parents specifically, is that you are a part of a system and you are a part of a program, and there is nothing healthy about that. Specifically, obviously, when we're looking at a talent identification system that is based on the premise of thinking that potential is there. Whereas from the scientific standpoint, or more humanized standpoint, is that every individual has that potential. It's about fine-tuning that and honing that in. And with the right tools, the right coaches, along that developmental pathway, you have all the skills there to reach that top potential. So it's very important to distinguish and differentiate between the systems and or programs in itself. So yes, it is a business-orientated scheme marketed to the sports development cohort and designed to pick the top of the crop, and then for them to be controlled, in a manner of speaking, by that governing body's coaching staff and or team. And this is a really important point. It was only a few months ago now that I was speaking to a player and their parents about feeling really let down and disheartened that they weren't accepted into a specific program. And they essentially thought it was almost the end of the road. And not so much that they were ready to give up, but it was like, we didn't make the cut, so we're not good enough. And I had to really sit them down and say, no, that is not the case whatsoever. And we're talking at players aged around that 10 to 12 year mark, and parents who are more susceptible about potentially not knowing how the system works. And this is where I guess we come in to give you that inside perspective, to share that not all is lost, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. The research tells us that being involved in those systems at the best of times can be, unfortunately, counterintuitive. And especially when you look at a sport such as tennis, there are obviously good things that can come out of these programs and systems. But if we're really focusing on talent identification, the pretense there is being judged on your ability at a certain age and being told that you are not good enough. And again, from that humanized perspective, that is incredibly disheartening and unhealthy, that no child should be told or insinuated to that they are not good enough. every child has that potential. And when we're talking about that age bracket, we're really talking about under 10 to that adolescent age group. It's fundamental to lead the way and to show the pathways that are accessible, and that especially when we're looking at a sport such as tennis, talent identification is incredibly outdated. Talent identification could and can be much broader. The current talent identification framework merely looks at a player's performance, specifically results, without taking into account external and internal factors that will undoubtedly impact and influence the player and or athlete in the long term. Now, that is fundamental because it's integral to treat a player and or athlete as a whole. It's not just about what's on paper. It's not simply about, it says, this person is performing exceptionally well, so we're going to admit them. It's not about that. Talent identification really needs to be broadened to accommodate effort to hard work, to accommodate such things as what they're seeing on the court or the field, and that the skills are actually there. The results will come. It could be a player who is literally losing nearly all of their matches, or maybe all of them, and that's okay. If the drive is there and the hard work is there, they're halfway there. Because if an athlete can keep that level of commitment up, they're one of the lucky ones. That is, from a coaching to scientific standpoint, that's where the magic happens. If the belief and the desire is there, it can slowly and steadily and progressively be nurtured to get towards that end point. And that is incredibly important and integral to looking at the athlete as a whole, and not just as a tool essentially that will deliver a business outcome. The system is primarily one-sided, and herein is the problem. Looking at a player's performance, let alone developmental players, which is typically the range for scouting talent identifications and subsequent players, is extremely limiting. There are a variety of factors to take into account and consider going forward long-term for player or athlete development, and guessing the type of results these players are going to produce. This is not best practice. And I guess essentially, if we look at simplifying that, it's ticking off a player and guessing their future outcome. So it's looking at a 10, 11, 12-year-old and saying, I think that you're good. I think that, yes, you have the skills that you could get a world ranking. The systems can be accountable to even looking at talent in children. And when we look at children and I say, that 6, 7, 8-year-old child saying, yes, I think you have the potential to be a very good player. Now, I'm sure it's not just me, and I'm sure many parents out there will put their hand up and say that's not essentially very ethical or morally sound to try to tell a child that they have potential or they don't, or they have the skills and they don't. That is not the role of sport. It is not the role of the developmental process. It's about fine-tuning those skills, and it's about giving them access to coaches that understand the model of development and going from there. This begs the question of the responsibility of the coaching staff or team in two forms. Whether they are equipped to identify in the first place, and if they are prepared to consciously develop this athlete and take on the responsibility without wavering, and leaving the athlete to fend for themselves if their performance does not add up. To the first point, if the talent identification scout, typically a coach and or person who knows what a good representation of a scouted performance resembles, is equipped to know what to look for, well, that's all done and good, but how? What specifically are they looking for? Now, this is a very significant part, because what we know, and again from a scientific standpoint, that the majority of these coaches do not know. They do not have access to the research. They do not have access to the level of upskilling or that depth of education to be able to identify this. And we're talking about key fundamentals here. And these skills and fundamentals are developed over time. And specifically when we're looking at tennis, we're also looking at coaches within the system that also don't have access to, or they haven't up-leveled their skills to acquire this depth of knowledge. And that is probably the most concerning part. You have coaches on both ends of the spectrum, those coaching top 10 players, those top 50 players, top 100, top 500 players, and then those who are responsible for developing the grassroots levels and so on. Though there's a big gap there. It's where is the pathway? Where is the knowledge of the progress and the steps? Not necessarily the periodization there. It's about what does that skill need to look like for that 10, 12-year-old, and where is it progressing, and who's taking them there? Does that person inside the talent identification system understand or know the next step or that next phase of development of that skill? Now, too often than not, the answer is no, and they go straight from what the skill is meant to look like for that 18, 20-year-old, and they're putting it into that 10-year-old. And unfortunately, a 10-year-old's body is not built the same as like that 18, 20-year-old's body. So that load, you'll recall in previous episodes, that load, it's not sustainable. And that is why you have a lot of, I'll say, children, players, athletes who enter that talent identification system at that age. They fall off the system as they get older because they are riddled with injuries. And again, it comes down to that mismanagement. And this is something I'm very passionate about, because no child should be inflicted with an injury that can be prevented if the right education and tools and steps are there. It only goes back to going to another centre within the last couple of months, and this young player, again inside that 10 to 12 age bracket, they just had a session and they were really sore. They're like, oh, I'm tired, I need a massage. And alarm bells ring, because it goes, why are you so tight? Have you been overloading yourself? Now let me have a look at your technique. Let me have a look at your load. And from an outsider's perspective, I took a look and I could see the warning signs already there. And it's incredibly disheartening, because we need to take a step back sometimes and obviously let it play out. We can only share with them our insights. And obviously I had a discussion with the parents to share this, and their coach as well. But that's not necessarily the point here. It's about the load and the mismanagement, but also the misunderstandings around this, that you almost have to be sore and you have to put in all this work. No, if you're at that age, you really shouldn't be experiencing that level of soreness. You can experience it, you can be tired and days off should be encouraged. But if you're going to continuously overload a growing body, I think it's just right in front of your face. Because you're going to get to that 15, 16, and the likelihood of you getting a more serious injury is pretty high. And if we go back to that drive, that determination, just really that unrelenting passion of that child who really is not getting the results they want in their early teen years, but that's still there, you know that if an injury comes, they're going to work through that. Now that is talent identification. But the player who has good skills, they've picked it up early on, and they don't have, I guess, the primary or that core drive that's there when that first injury comes, they might get through it. The odds are pretty high, but if they get another, the likelihood is no. And especially if that enjoyment isn't there, no. But I guess that's another topic of enjoyment, because irrespective if you're in the talent identification system or not, sports in general, irrespective of what age you're at, the enjoyment should be the constant. It should be what gets you out of bed in the morning, stays, whether in the pool, on the court, in the field, for however many hours it is every week. It's because you absolutely love what you're doing. Okay. Merely going off looks of a player's performance does a disservice to the player or athlete. Why? Because sport and sport performance is so much more than results. From a player's attitude to what goes on behind the scenes, how committed they are to their sport, the time they are prepared to put in when their opponents are resting, or even their level of academic results, which can indicate an athlete's level and pursuit of excellence. This has to be one of my absolute favourite topics to narrow in on. And okay, I do have a few favourites, I do admit. But the link between an athlete's education and their results is profound. Sure, you have athletes where the exception is there, though when we're really looking at their level of aptitude for the classroom, it actually transfers onto the court or field, pool, etc. And by that I mean their level of not necessarily engagement, it's the commitment, but it's also the ability to learn and being able to cultivate that in a framework that is inquisitive enough to learn more, to want to know the answers. Because how that transfers in sport, or specifically in tennis, it's you are constantly problem solving. You are constantly on the move, wondering what your opponent is going to do next. It's akin to like a game of chess. And I'm sure it's fair to say that most chess players are incredibly intelligent, because it's about that knowledge process, that problem solving, the thinking process, everything that goes on behind that before the next move is made. Now, tennis is incredibly similar but different, because time is of the essence. You don't get to control the time the opponent hits the ball back necessarily. You know most likely that ball is coming back, irrespective, obviously, if it's a winner, that's very different. But let's focus on like a typical rally, back, forth, etc., when you're setting the point up, looking to open up the court before you can go for that winner. So it's about having the next point of play in mind and being able to think in advance. So if you have a good record in the classroom of being able to think and problem solve your way out of something, that is an incredible skill to have and to hone in on. And not many coaches to parents and players are actually aware of that and conscious of how that can actually transition. Players or athletes that do not have that skill and who have not fine-tuned, I guess, that level of academia, they have a very different problem-solving process. It could just be specific to their sport, and that's okay. But we're talking actually like the next level up. And if you really want to look at and figure out your opponent and get into the nitty-gritty, that's what differentiates an exceptional athlete to a good or great athlete. And we know, not necessarily in the Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, we don't dive into that, but my later publications, especially the 7 Keys to Optimize Your Life, that uses tennis as a blueprint there, we know that if you're putting in the hard work there, from that problem-solving perspective, it transitions and relates. It almost, it's cross-sectional, interrelational to about how sport complements life and vice versa. Okay. You see, a developing athlete cannot just be identified. There are numerous other factors to consider, and this is where talent identification does not serve its purpose, which is incredibly fundamental again, and it's no secret, it's what we started with, is that telling a child or athlete, when they're anywhere from 8 years of age to even 13 years of age, is that you're good, we're going to give you the tools and access to this, compared to, an 18-year-old is very different. And it goes back to re-educating or giving a broader range of coaches the tools and access to help aspiring athletes to become better, to develop those core skills so they can progress, rather than being at risk of excluding them. And let's be honest again, is that you're going to be including a very, very small percentage of players in these programs compared to the majority. And the likelihood that a child or player in a talent identification program is going to become a top 20, top 10 player is actually incredibly small. The odds are almost arguably higher for someone who is not in that talent identification program. But again, it comes back to access to resources. If both of them have access to the same resources, but one's just simply not inside a program, it's also argued to be healthier. And we say that because we know from a humanized standpoint, having the coach-athlete relationship, which we've previously touched on, that is a constant rather than the chopping and changing, which is more typical in a talent identification system and or program, that you are better off and it is sustainable. We're going to finish on that topic because it's a very big one, and I think it gives a lot of insights or food for thought to really think about or reevaluate the core objectives behind the pathway of where you're heading, and obviously why and how you're going to get there, where those resources are, how they can be redirected to help. And not being picked or chosen to partake in a program and or system, it's not the worst thing. It's not the end of the world. It again potentially could be argued that it's a blessing in disguise, because it allows you more freedom and flexibility. Certain, proponents that are not included in those systems or programs that essentially work in your favor, if you have access to them or the knowledge of them, and they're available. And I think essentially that's where AM8 International comes in. And that is something that we've devised and developed going on now 18, 19 years to build specific pathways to give parents, coaches, athletes, players access to those tools that guide you to that end Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I've had a lot of fun. I hope you have too. If you want more or to read up on anything further, please head to AM8 International. That's am8international.com. All the links are in the bio. And if you have any comments on today's show, please leave them. And also the best comment, and I would love this for this week, I will personally send you a signed copy as a very big thank you for your feedback, because I'm a big fan of that. But also, please rate the show, whether you're on Spotify or any of the other platforms. That would mean the absolute world to me. If you give us a 5 stars, subscribe, follow, please do, because it means that Beyond Top 10 Tennis will be front and center in more, players, athletes, coaches, just individuals who have an interest in this area. It will essentially be easier to find, which also means that we're sharing the good news with, people with similar interests, but who also have the same endpoint in mind, which I think it's all about. If you want something different though, and I haven't shared this to date, head on over to Pink Octopus Books. That is a fictional book, essentially centered at the parents out there it's a bit different, it's a bit of fun. I had a lot of fun writing it. If you'd like to get in contact with me directly though, head to Topic Thread. That's topicthread.com. Again, I will leave it in the bio, the podcast notes. But also it is the social network, and it's the only social network that I'm on because, again, I'm big about data privacy, and we especially think or believe that everyone should have control of their data in that respect. I am your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and I'm so grateful for you tuning in and listening today. Thank you so much. This is Beyond Top 10 Tennis, and I'll see you next time.